Welcome to the Catholic Midlife podcast, where we address the challenges and the opportunities of midlife from a uniquely Catholic perspective. This is the time, my friends, for a deeper renewal of your Christian vocation. Come and enter into the freedom of Christ that allows you to be the person you were created to be, because there's an amazing, awesome, exciting next season of life waiting for you. Hello and welcome to the Catholic Midlife podcast. You're here with Karen and Curtis Herbert.
Hi, everybody.
And I'm curious if we have a listener comment this morning, Curtis.
Well, we do. I was talking with one of our listeners, and he said, I really like this season on boundaries. I found that as I get older, it's easier and easier for me to make the boundaries, or I'm more likely to do so.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, and he said that what he really appreciated was some of your comments, Karen, about how you can kind of ease into it, or you can make it a more positive experience. And he just thought, yeah, I could kind of focus in that way.
Yeah. A couple of things that's been standing out to me throughout this season, Curtis. One is if we shift our own mindset that boundaries are positive and they're good for us, I think that could just bring a whole different kind of energy to the conversations we have around them. And the other thing is, this is really a skill. It's just something you learn how to do. So it makes sense to me that as we get older, we have a better sense, A, of who we are and what's important to us, and B, how to go about using the skill in a positive way.
I think that's right. And I was reading Townsend and Cloud, one of the resources, one of the books we used for this season, and I felt like I just wasn't done with this topic. And I was reading towards the end of the book some of the steps or signs that you're kind of growing in your boundary awareness.
I'm curious. What are the signs?
Well, they had a number of them. And one of them that really caught my eye was their first one was said resentment.
Resentment is a sign that you're growing.
Could be. It can be a sign. And they're drawing on their own practice where they had, as an example, a client, call him Jason. He had one of these extreme family upbringing things where he just couldn't get the time of day. He was very controlled by his family. And he, as an adult, he'd just put up with everything. And one day he was at church and one of his friends came up and said, "Hey, Jason, are your clothes shrinking on you? Ha, 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 ha."
Ooh.
So he's talking about his weight.
Yeah.
And Jason felt resentment. And he was there with some other people. And here's this guy making a funny comment. And he went home and he thought, what's wrong with me? That stuff never used to bother me before. It didn't even register. And the Townsend's comment is, well, Jason was learning, hey, there's some boundaries here. And there's this guy saying these things to me, and I don't think it's funny, and I don't appreciate it. And for the first time, he's coming into an awareness of that, hey, it's okay for me to live my life the way I think I'm supposed to be and to preserve my own dignity.
I think that's a really great point, Curtis, especially because emotions give us information. And it sounds kind of like this guy maybe hadn't had that emotion around incidents like that. So maybe he was thinking, oh, well, I should stop being resentful, or I need to get over this, or I need to, have a different emotion. But really that was giving him some information that was critical. And because he had a deeper understanding and had the growth, he was in a position to hear the information and respond.
Right. So his unconscious mind knew he was ready to take some action. So it really flagged the situation for him with resentment.
And because he didn't stuff the negative emotion or criticize himself for having it, he could listen to it and recognize its role in the whole process.
Yeah. And that's another situation where resentment often is a sign is the fixer, right? We're going to fix. We're going to help everybody. We're going to serve, and they're going to appreciate us.
Right.
Then if they don't, boy, we're going to give them both barrels.
Yeah. I like that
And
example.
I think what caught my eye was resentment. It can be a toxic emotion. You can sort of like envy or something. You can start to entertain it,
Yeah.
and you can start to feed it. So there's an art to getting the information.
Yeah.
And perhaps not being so quick to reframe or to explain it away or shut it down. At the same time, continuing to have an awareness of, okay, what's this telling me? Is this serving me? And then perhaps moving on.
Right. Or taking the action you need, which I think is going to allow the emotion to have its say, and then the emotion can move on because you've responded in a way that served you.
That's right.
Actually, I'm just having this insight into something I just said. I think I'm going to reframe the way I talk about, experiencing the emotions. I think we do say a lot, well, I just need to move on, or I'm going to move on. But really, it's the emotion that needs to come in and have its say, and then the emotion needs to move on. And it's going to be able to do that when it feels like it's been heard and responded to. So I'm going to come back to this idea, I think, in the future and change the way I'm talking about that.
It's like your friend that's dropping in for a visit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some friends are more fun than other friends. Karen, in these examples of Jason and the fixer, there's kind of an emphasis on saying no, on repairing porous boundaries, on making appropriate walls to protect ourselves. And often there's a big focus on saying no because that's a kind of a common thing. It's a more obvious, it's kind of endemic to Christian cultures. We don't like to say no because we want to focus on serving. However, really the focus is on healthy boundaries. And of course, it's possible to say no to too many things or to be too distant in our close personal relationships, like our marriage. If we're too distant, if we're not sharing something about our interior life, if we're not letting people know something about our ups and downs and likes and dislikes, then that's a pretty distant boundary, and it's going to make for a challenging life.
So some fences we need to open up a little more.
Yeah, and of course, Brene Brown made her, mark in the world by studying vulnerability and making the point that we have to be vulnerable. And she made the point also in that early research that the vulnerable people also had boundaries and they knew how to draw them. And that's what let them be able to be vulnerable at, the right time and place.
So part of the art here, Curtis, I'm hearing is appreciating what the appropriate boundary in a particular situation is and learning to shift it as necessary.
That's right. Okay, are you ready for another one?
I was just about to ask for one.
Well, they give us a couple more signs, and these are having to do with becoming drawn to other boundary lovers.
Oh, so you're going to attract and be attracted to other people who set good boundaries.
Yeah, as we learn to set boundaries, people that are unable to do that, they may tend to drift away as we, if they learn that we're not going to just come and go at their bidding, maybe that's not the kind of friend they want.
Yeah.
And so this can be true of individuals and groups. They're going to have to find the right level with our boundaries. And I'm going to quote what they say here in Cloud and Townsend's book. Cloud and Townsend, excuse me, gentlemen. We are created to love, to be meaningfully close to God and to others. When we find relationships in which we have freedom to set limits, something wonderful happens. In addition to the freedom to say no, we find the freedom to say a wholehearted, unconflicted, gratitude-driven yes to others. We become attracted to boundary lovers because in them we find permission to be honest, authentic, loving individuals.
That is a lovely quote. And it's reminding me of something I have heard before, which is if you can't say no, you can't really say yes.
That's right, Karen. And that's usually in the context of relationships with individuals. However, I think relationships with groups, organizations, this can also be true. We have to engage with them and say yes where we're able. But if we can't say no, then life is going to be pretty hard.
Okay, Curtis, hit me with another sign.
Hit me. So they call this one treasuring our treasures. So here their comment is, your values will start to change. You will begin to see that taking responsibility for yourself is healthy, and you'll begin to understand that taking responsibility for other adults is destructive. In the fixer example, for instance, we know this,
right?
That taking responsibility for others, it's one thing to try to help, to offer help, to be an influence, yet once we're taking responsibility for their outcomes, that's not going to work out.
I think if you are a parent listening to this and you have young adult children, say in their 20s, this is really key. And you're probably working really hard to figure out what this balance is between taking responsibility for yourself and supporting your young adult without taking responsibility for them. And in that in-between stage, it does take kind of a little more intentionality and discernment to decide, okay, what is appropriate for me in this situation? What are we going to decide to do?
I absolutely agree, Karen. It is not so obvious. Just knowing about boundaries doesn't mean you know where to draw them.
And you could get some really good input from other people, and nobody's really going to have the advice that's going to tell you what to do. So it takes some work to figure that out.
It's really true. We would love to have somebody just tell us what to do, but what we need is somebody to help us figure out what we need to do.
Yeah.
Help us figure it out. Now, their example, it's another pretty extreme one. They had a client, a person that was really ignored, not loved growing up, and just that person was not investing in themselves. They would just kind of give the people around them whatever they wanted without regard to what was happening in their own lives. And this is a pretty extreme case of just kind of, really dissipated living, just going around with people. And Townsend and Cloud say, and they're drawing a more general conclusion, they say, many people are told over and over again that nurturing and maintaining their souls is selfish and wrong. After a while, they develop a deep conviction that this is true. And at that point, they placed little value in taking care of the feelings, balance, thoughts, attitudes, behavior, body, and resources God entrusted to them.
Curtis, I think this is one area where releasing our baggage can be really helpful in allowing us to move forward and set the boundaries that we need to. I mean, in that example, surely there's some underlying beliefs and negative emotions that the person may not even be aware of. And just releasing that allows the opportunity then for new action and different priorities to take place. And if you're wondering what we're talking about as you listening to this, I'll send you back to our four requisites for change episode, which goes through that.
Thanks, Karen. I'm not sure I did justice to the example in the book. It was a pretty extreme case. And the point that you made, it really highlights how all of us, as we roll through life, as you talk to people, everybody's been through something pretty hard. And we all have some things to let go of so that we can continue to grow in the way that we want. This example is a little bit about someone whose self-identity was so beaten down that they weren't able to, treat themselves well. There's definitely some tension in the messaging we get as Christians. I mean, there's a lot of messaging around humility it's pretty aggressive. It's very heavy-handed. It has a focus on making yourself feel worthless. And that kind of messaging, it may have been appropriate in some contexts. I don't know. But for the most part, it is not helpful. That is not the healthy kind of boundary that we need.
Well, part of it too, Curtis, is we come to all of the Christian messaging with our own model of the world. And if we are stuck in a certain model and we hear something, we're going to hear it in a certain way. And we're just going to support perhaps a misunderstanding that we have at a really deep unconscious level. Oh, well, that just confirms that I'm being selfish if I'm taking care of myself. Or, yeah, I really need to be serving more. And so it can get really complicated to know, well, how are we intended to hear this message? What is the true gospel saying to me?
Wow, what a big topic. I guess I kind of opened up that
can of worms. Maybe. We might come back around to that a different episode.
I mean, at the same time, let's acknowledge that there's other messaging from the more popular culture that's very ego-driven and self-aggrandizing, and it's all about me, and we have to resist that as well. So where's the true gospel? Where's the Spirit leading me? So let's pick another signpost or two, shall we?
Yes, please.
All right. One of their signposts is practicing baby knows.
If you're practicing this skill, that's a good sign. Is that what they mean?
That's right. And their example is around people that really aren't used to setting any kind of boundaries. And their advice is, well, why don't you start just with something small?
Yeah.
Like, I noticed that you always take the biggest, comfiest chair every time we're in this meeting. And I feel like you should share it. That was their example.
Yeah.
So does that seem petty? I don't know. Depends on the circumstance, maybe.
If you're practicing, it's good to pick something and get used to perhaps how uncomfortable you feel saying something like that.
Ah, yes.
And sort of develop your capacity to do that, and even in the midst of feeling uncomfortable.
Yes, which leads to another one of their signs is embracing the guilty feelings when you set boundaries.
Ouch. I see you left that to the end, Curtis. No fair.
And that's kind of the boundary setting hangover.
Yeah.
You set the boundary and then later you kind of go off and you think, ooh, was I too harsh? Was I this? Was I that? And you kind of, crouching, waiting for somebody to come beat you up.
I think guilt is one of those emotions we have to work with a little to discern the information that we're really meant to receive, because we often will be like, oh, whoops, guilt. Therefore, I did something wrong. I made a mistake. I should go back and do the opposite. And that's not really always the information that guilt is giving me.
So one of the final signs for the authors was value-driven goal setting. How does that sound?
What exactly do they mean? I think I need an example.
Value-driven goal setting. So you're able to set some goals based on your values. And their example is a couple that really struggled with the family budget. They struggled over spending the money. And over time, over the course of some few years, they went from kind of being reactive and going back and forth to being able to set goals for their family life on how they wanted to spend their money. They made a budget. They were able to stick to it. They moved into a value-driven era of spending their own money.
I think this is really important. There's a deep connection between goals and boundaries. I mean, if you don't have boundaries, you can't set and achieve goals because you'll always get distracted and get off course and not stay focused. And maybe if you're not used to setting boundaries, you may also recognize that you don't often set goals, or if you do, you don't really take the action to achieve them.
Well, Karen, we're going to wrap up our season on boundaries. And that was sort of an interesting collection of thoughts we had, that you can have a shift. You can have a shift if you get more comfortable and positive about setting boundaries.
Awesome. Thanks for spearheading this season, Curtis. I thought it was very profitable.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad you think so. And I invite our listeners to join us on our website, thecatholicmidlife.com. And we have information and resources and links to the podcast and everything else. So come check it out, and we will see you next week. Thanks for being here with us. The Catholic Midlife podcast is for anyone that wants to receive the abundance of life that God has for each one of us. Take a moment right now to tell a friend about us.